Imagine a time long before the pyramids pierced the desert sky, long before Rome was a glimmer in the eyes of its founders, when history wasn't measured in decades, centuries, or even millennia. It was measured in epochs so vast they dwarfed the entirety of recorded human civilization. This is the story of Sumer, the cradle of civilization, but not the Sumer you read about in standard high school textbooks. This is the history of the Sumerian kings list, a seemingly mundane clay tablet that holds a secret so profound, so utterly disruptive to our understanding of human origins, that mainstream academia often treats it less like a historical artifact and more like an inconvenient, elaborate fairy tale. What if the first rulers of humanity were not, in fact, human? What if the concept of kingship was literally, physically, handed down from the sky? We are trained to accept that civilization began roughly 6,000 years ago, but the king list defies this neat categorization. It meticulously details a lineage of monarchs who ruled for times that are absolutely staggering, tens of thousands of years per ruler. We aren't talking about King Alulim reigning for a mere 40 years. We are talking about a documented reign of 28,800 years. His successor, Alalngar, supposedly held the throne for 36,000 years. If the dates are to be taken literally, these were not men, but near-immortal entities who watched entire ice ages melt and reshape the landscape of what would become modern Iraq. The list begins with a stark, unsettling preamble, a declaration that sets the tone for the entire mystery. Kingship was lowered from heaven. This phrase isn't poetry, it's a categorical statement of origin. It suggests that the governing structure, the very foundation of civilization, was an extraterrestrial, or at least a non-human import. The beings who brought this kingship are known in Sumerian mythology as the Anunnaki. Before dismissing this as mere mythological fluff, we must examine the archaeological context. Sumer was arguably the most advanced culture of its time, responsible for inventing writing, the wheel, complex mathematics, and irrigation systems. They didn't just crawl out of the mud, they seemed to burst forth, fully formed, with complex societal structures and astronomical knowledge that still perplexes experts today. They described their gods, the Anunnaki, not as abstract spirits dwelling on distant Olympus, but as flesh and blood beings who required food, shelter, and who frequently interfered in human affairs, often with violent, tangible consequences. Think about the sheer weight of time. Try to internalize what a single, continuous reign of 30 millennia would look like. It would involve watching the slow evolution of language, the subtle shifts in climate, the rise and fall of pre-urban settlements, not as historical events, but as fleeting background noise to one's own perpetual existence. The kings described in the antediluvian pre-flood section of the list weren't just long-lived. They were the shepherds of early humanity, guiding us from primitive tribal existence into the first great cities like Eridu and Bad Tibira. Eridu, often cited as the first city on Earth, was described by the Sumerians as the place where the Anunnaki leader, Enki, first established his residence. The ruins of Eridu show evidence of continuous occupation dating back perhaps 7,300 years, significantly older than almost any other known urban center. But the king list insists the time span was infinitely greater. Was this a historical exaggeration designed to confer legitimacy, or were these reigns literal, and our current archaeological dating methods are simply insufficient to grasp the true antiquity of these rulers? The king list demands that we question the accepted narrative. If kingship was lowered from heaven, then who were the heavenly ones? And what was their ultimate objective for mankind? The Anunnaki prophecy hinges entirely on answering that question. We are told they came. They ruled, they disappeared after a global cataclysm, and then they returned, granting shorter reigns to a new, fully human line of kings. This cyclical pattern of intervention and withdrawal forms the heart of the prophecy. that their return is not a matter of if, but when, tied to cosmic events they themselves engineered. The sheer audacity of the claim is what makes the king list a source of enduring fascination and controversy. For 8 kings ruling in 5 different cities, the cumulative reign amounts to 241,200 years. This time, scale breaks all known paradigms of human biological limitations and historical cycles. It forces us to confront the possibility that history, as we know it, is simply the postscript to a much grander, far more alien story. The air of the ancient Mesopotamian plains, dry and heavy with dust, seems to still hold the echo of these impossibly long reigns, waiting for an ear willing to listen beyond the rigid confines of academic skepticism. We stand at the precipice of a secret buried not just in the sands of the Middle East, but in the footnotes of forbidden history. The king list is not just a roster. It is a timeline, charting the moment the divine touched the mortal, establishing a template for governance that persists even today, thousands of years later. The very notion of monarchy, of inherited or divine right to rule, finds its genesis in this tablet, tracing back not to local warlords, but to beings who flew in metallic crafts and spoke of worlds beyond our solar system. The complexity of the cuneiform script, the dedication of the scribes to meticulously documenting these impossible numbers, suggests a deep reverence for the truth they were recording, even if that truth defied logic. They weren't writing fiction. They were recording history as it was taught to them, the history of their masters, the Anunnaki. If this beginning has already made you rethink everything you thought you knew about where we come from, you're on the right track. This journey requires an open mind, willing to challenge the comfortable lies we've been told. If this beginning already made you rethink everything you thought you knew, imagine what is coming next. So hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel, because here every video reveals something few dare to show, and we're just scratching the surface of the Anunnaki's influence. The standard historical model prefers the simple explanation. The colossal reign lengths listed on the Sumerian king list are mythological exaggerations, attempts by later kings to link themselves to a glorious, deified past, thereby cementing their own terrestrial authority. But this dismissal ignores the specificity and precision with which these dates are recorded. Mythologies usually employ round numbers. Here we have numbers like 28,800 or 36,000, specific figures that suggest calculation rather than poetic hyperbole. They are too precise to be mere fantasy. To understand the Anunnaki prophecy, we must first accept the king list as the core historical document that the Sumerians themselves believed it to be. The kingship starts in Eridu, moves to Bad Tibira, then Larag, Sipar, and finally Shurupak, until the Great Flood wipes the slate clean. This movement, this geographical progression, suggests a strategic, coordinated installation of governance, not random mythical wanderings. Let us focus on Bad Tibira, the second city of kingship. Here, 3 kings allegedly reigned for a combined total of 108,000 years. These were Enmenluana, Enmengal-ana, and Dumuzid the shepherd. The titles themselves are revealing. En is often translated as high priest or lord, suggesting they were both religious and political authorities. They were the intermediaries between the Anunnaki themselves, the true hidden power, and the burgeoning human population. The sheer longevity of these rulers is essential to the Anunnaki narrative. If the Anunnaki were managing a global operation, perhaps involving mining, genetic engineering, the creation of the human species, according to some interpretations of their texts, and the establishment of global infrastructure, they would need overseers capable of executing multi-millennial plans. Human beings, with their fleeting 80-year lifespans, are too transient, too short-sighted to manage such cosmic endeavors. The antediluvian kings, therefore, acted as perfect, durable proxies for their celestial masters. The cuneiform tablets, pressed into wet clay thousands of years ago, offer cryptic clues. They describe a complex social structure where the gods were physically present. The Anunnaki, led by figures like Enlil, Lord Command, Enki, Lord Earth, and Ishtar, Inanna, were not merely worshipped, they were obeyed. They lived in temples, ziggurats, which were not just places of worship, but logistical centers, distribution hubs for grain, and crucially, landing pads for the celestial chariots described in many texts. Consider the atmosphere of those early cities. The air would be thick with the awe and dread inspired by rulers who never aged, who could recall events that predated the great-great-grandparents of any living subject. These kings were living history books, their knowledge base encompassing entire human evolutionary cycles. What would conversation be like with a ruler who saw the transition from nomadic existence to settled farming firsthand, thousands of times over? Their perspective on life, death, and time itself would be utterly alien to us. This detachment, this vast temporal gulf, is the central pillar supporting the theory that these were not human beings. They were perhaps a genetically enhanced hybrid or pure Anunnaki, utilizing their own biological clock which operates on an entirely different scale compared to humanity. The transition from the rule of the Anunnaki proxies to the post-flood human kings is often marked by an event of catastrophic proportions, the deluge. The king list itself states, "Then the flood swept over. After the flood swept over and kingship was lowered from heaven, a second time, the kingship was in Kish." This dramatic bifurcation, the clear line drawn at the Great Flood, is not just a narrative device. It confirms the synchronization of the Sumerian king list with the global flood myths found in virtually every culture worldwide, from Native American tribes to Hindu epics. But here is where the prophecy truly begins to take shape. The flood was, according to many interpretations of Sumerian texts, an intentional act, a decision made by the highest council of the Anunnaki, primarily led by Enlil, who was apparently fed up with the noise and chaos of mankind. Enki, the patron of humanity, supposedly betrayed this pact and warned a single human, Ziusudra, the Sumerian Noah, thereby preserving a seed of humanity. This conflict among the Anunnaki is key. They weren't a monolithic entity, they were a dysfunctional, powerful, and warring family of gods, beings. Their conflicts dictated the fate of humanity. The prophecy suggests that the first age of kingship, the very long reigns, was a period of preparation, preparing the planet for something, and preparing humanity for a specific role. The flood served as a necessary reset, eliminating the failed experiment and paving the way for the second age. We are trying to piece together a puzzle where the vast majority of pieces are missing, possibly deliberately removed or simply swallowed by the merciless desert sands. Every cuneiform fragment, every shattered tablet discovered near the Euphrates and Tigris rivers is scrutinized by researchers seeking that definitive link between myth and history. They are searching for the blueprint that the Anunnaki left behind. The context of the environment matters immensely. Sumer was fertile, a paradise engineered by complex irrigation systems that the Anunnaki taught the early humans to build. They didn't just teach farming, they taught sophisticated city planning, metallurgy, and astronomy. Knowledge that, according to the records, came fully formed and operational. This rapid leap from simple hunter-gatherers to complex urban society is called the Sumerian anomaly, and the king list provides the only explanation for it: external instruction provided by super long-lived masters. The profound philosophical question remains: if they ruled for so long and then drastically cut the reign lengths of the post-flood kings from thousands of years to mere decades or centuries, what changed? Why the sudden withdrawal of divine longevity? This shift is the first major clue in understanding the prophecy. It suggests that after the flood, The Anunnaki recognized that their direct intervention, or the intervention of their quasi-immortal proxies, was no longer necessary, or perhaps was too disruptive. They had achieved a certain baseline, a civilization capable of maintaining itself, and their presence could transition from direct ruler to distant observer. They moved from the foreground to the background. This historical shift from the rule of the giants to the rule of men is the turning point. It implies that the true objective of the Anunnaki might have been achieved, or conversely, that they simply needed a break. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this information resonates deep within you. Then strengthen this content. Hit the like button now and share it with someone who needs to see this deep dive into forgotten history. The shift in reign length following the deluge is statistically impossible to ignore. The post-flood kings, beginning in the city of Kish, exhibit lifespans that, while still sometimes exaggerated by modern standards, e.g. King Etana ruling for 1,560 years, are exponentially shorter than their predecessors. The average reign drops from tens of thousands of years to hundreds, and eventually to historical norms of decades. The immense chronological burden is lifted, and human history, as we recognize it, begins to accelerate. Why Kish? After the king list explicitly states that the flood swept over and kingship was lowered from heaven a second time, Kish is chosen. This implies a strategic re-establishment of command centers. Kish was located strategically near a major river route, allowing easy access and distribution. This wasn't a random choice. It was a calculated restart to the Anunnaki's grand experiment. The post-flood period saw the rise of legendary figures who blur the line between mortal hero and demigod. Chief among them is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, famous from the epic that bears his name. The king list records Gilgamesh, the fifth king of the first dynasty of Uruk, reigning for 126 years, a much more manageable, albeit still impressive lifespan. The Epic of Gilgamesh, however, is crucial to understanding the prophecy because it directly explores the relationship between the newly mortal human kings and their eternal celestial overlords. Gilgamesh was 2/3 god and 1/3 man. His entire life was defined by the struggle between his inherited mortality, the human third, and his demigod power, the divine 2/3. His epic journey is driven by the fear of death and the quest for eternal life, the very longevity that the first kings of Sumer possessed. He journeys across the world seeking out the Sumerian Noah, Utnapishtim, Ziusudra, who survived the flood and was granted immortality by the gods. This narrative thread is the Anunnaki prophecy internalized by humanity. The great kings of the Second Age knew they had been stripped of the eternal privilege. They were constantly aware that their rulers, the Anunnaki, held the secret to unending life, and that they had deliberately withheld it from the new human lineage. Gilgamesh's epic is essentially humanity's first great existential cry against the mortality imposed upon them by their creators. The Anunnaki's presence during this Second Age was still palpable, though perhaps more veiled. Instead of ruling for 30 millennia, they acted as distant patrons, occasionally intervening when human politics deviated too far from their established parameters. The temples were still their homes, guarded by high priests who served as effective governors. The system remained theocracy, but the gods were now subtly retreating. This gradual withdrawal is the true heart of the prophecy. The training wheels were coming off. If the Anunnaki were here for resources, specifically gold, as proposed by some researchers based on interpretations of the Enuma Elish, then the vast, coordinated governance of the antediluvian kings was likely a period dedicated to setting up the infrastructure for that extraction. The post-flood kings, with their shorter lives, were now tasked with maintaining that infrastructure, ruling over the labor force, humanity, and keeping the systems running smoothly until the Anunnaki returned to harvest or utilize the fruits of that labor. The king list, therefore, becomes a logistical schedule. The immense reigns were necessary for the complex groundwork. The shorter reigns represent the period of maintenance and management by human proxies. The Anunnaki prophecy suggests a pattern of cycles. They come, they establish, they leave, they return. Why? Because their existence, tied to their supposed home world, Nibiru, which allegedly has an orbital cycle of thousands of years, dictates that they can only remain on Earth during certain astronomical conjunctions. If the planet Nibiru, or whatever their homeworld was, dictates their calendar, then the Sumerian king's list is less a history book and more an astronomical chart overlaid onto human governance. The extremely long reigns might correspond to a single, massive orbit or a series of critical visits during a favorable cosmic window. The flood marks the end of that major window, and the subsequent reigns mark the period of waiting, the long interval where human proxies hold the fort until the celestial alignment happens again. This provides the ultimate tension. The prophecy is not about doom, but about continuity. It's the waiting game. Are we, right now, living under the final fleeting human administrations before the next great alignment, which would trigger the return of the original rulers? The Sumerians certainly believed this. Their texts are riddled with pleas and fears regarding the gods' moods, their departures, and their eventual reappearances. They built their societies entirely around servicing the needs of these demanding, powerful, long-lived beings. Every aspect of their culture, from their calendar system to their sophisticated legal codes, was designed to ensure the Anunnaki, upon their return, would find the planet in order and their resources ready. Think about the psychological impact of living under this expectation. You are not ruling for yourself, you are a caretaker. Your entire civilization is a highly efficient ancient clock, ticking down the seconds until the masters come back to check their domain. This expectation created the intense religious fervor and the rigid obedience seen throughout Sumerian history. We must address the inherent difficulty in translating these ancient languages. Cuneiform is complex, often allowing for multiple interpretations of key terms. The word SARS, which is used to denote the years of reign, is sometimes translated as a unit of 3,600 years, making the 36,000-year reigns equal to 10 SARs. Some skeptics suggest that SAR simply meant year, but that the scribes later inflated the numbers for political reasons. However, if SAR truly meant 3,600 years, it speaks volumes about the Anunnaki's relationship to time. They dealt in units that spanned multiple human generations. If we accept the 3,600-year translation for SAR, the reigns remain immense, still far exceeding human capability, but they become slightly less absurd. The 36,000-year reign becomes 10 SARs, or 10 periods of major rule cycles. But even if we drastically reduce the numbers, the core anomaly remains. Who were these first kings who ruled for times that far eclipsed the lifespans of any subsequent human ruler? And why did the duration of kingship dramatically shorten after the global cataclysm? The flood, the reset, the shortening of life, it is all too coordinated to be accidental. It points to a managed transition. The deeper we dive into these tablets, the clearer the ancient agenda becomes. If you're feeling the weight of this historical truth, then show your support for independent research. Drop a comment below with your biggest revelation so far, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Your engagement fuels the revelation of these hidden narratives. Let's delve deeper into the nature of the first city, Eridu, the seat of the initial, impossibly long reigns. Eridu means the place of mighty guidance. It was established by Enki, the Anunnaki lord of water and wisdom, who is often portrayed as the most benevolent, or at least the most sympathetic, toward humanity. He was the great engineer, the one who taught men the Mies, the divine decrees and arts that formed the basis of civilization. Eridu was located near the Persian Gulf, a watery, marshy region perfect for the cultivation of early agriculture. It wasn't built like later, fortified cities. It was designed as a sacred space, a nexus point between the Anunnaki and early developing humanity. The structure of the earliest temples found there suggests a pattern of rebuilding over millennia, always on the exact same spot, maintaining the sacred alignment. This persistence over vast tracts of time aligns perfectly with the king list's narrative of rulers who occupied the same seat for scores of thousands of years. They provided a continuous, unbroken line of authority, watching over the slow development of civilization. The kings of Eridu, Alulim, and Alalangar were likely not just rulers, but direct emissaries, perhaps even biological sons of the Anunnaki themselves, tasked with establishing the initial parameters of the human experiment. Their extreme longevity ensured doctrinal purity. There was no chance of their mission being corrupted by new generations with shifting priorities. The goal, whatever it was, the establishment of the infrastructure, the preparation of the human genome, the setting up of the gold extraction, was locked in for the duration of their reign. The sheer weight of responsibility these kings bore is unimaginable. They didn't rule over simple human populations. They ruled over the genesis of consciousness and society. They were the first teachers, the first lawgivers, dictating the very rhythms of life. Their palaces would have been centers of immense technological and esoteric knowledge, vastly superior to anything humanity would reinvent for thousands of years. Imagine the atmosphere in the court of Alulim. The air would likely be charged with the scent of burning cedar and incense, masking the hot, earthy smell of the Mesopotamian plains. The king himself, described in texts as possessing a light, almost metallic sheen to his skin, would move with the measured patience of someone who views a human lifespan as a blink. The human attendants would be hushed, perhaps terrified, always aware that their ruler operated on a scale of time they could not possibly comprehend. This isn't just about a long life, it's about a long memory. These rulers retained the institutional memory of the entire pre-flood world. They would remember the earliest days when the Anunnaki had just landed, the raw, unrefined state of the planet, and the moment the first human workers were engineered. This memory gave them unparalleled power and perspective, making human resistance or rebellion utterly futile. They weren't just kings, they were living embodiments of the Anunnaki master plan. The prophecy states that the Anunnaki established two major components, the technology and the lineage. The technology allowed for the rapid advancement of Sumer, writing, math, astronomy. The lineage, maintained by the antediluvian kings, guaranteed that the ruling class, the caretakers, were always genetically predisposed to serve the Anunnaki agenda. The transfer of kingship between the five antediluvian cities, Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larag, Sipar, Shurupak, is another critical logistical detail often overlooked. This wasn't a sudden conquest. It was a peaceful, planned transition. One city served its purpose. The Anunnaki infrastructure was established and the seat of power moved to the next strategic location. Each move seems to correspond to the progressive development of the Mesopotamian infrastructure, perhaps moving closer to mining operations or major astronomical observation points. Sipar, the fourth city, was the seat of Enmendur-Ana, who allegedly reigned for 21,000 years. Sipar was associated with the worship of the sun god Utu, Shamash, who was a high-ranking Anunnaki. This reinforces the idea that each city was designated for a specific Anunnaki function or deity. If Sipar was the center for astronomical observation, then the king ruling there would have been intensely focused on celestial mechanics, perhaps tracking the return cycle of the Anunnaki homeworld. This king, more than any other, would have held the detailed timetable of the prophecy. The prophecy, therefore, wasn't just a vague prediction. It was a detailed schedule tied to orbits and alignments that exceeded human comprehension. The kings were merely the human-facing administrators of this cosmic timetable. The closer the Sumerian civilization got to the flood, the more chaotic the environment became, both politically and cosmically. The texts suggest that the Anunnaki began fighting among themselves, primarily over control of the human worker population and the future direction of the planet. Enlil, the rigid traditionalist, wanted humanity wiped out due to their disobedience and noise, while Enki, the creator, wanted them preserved. The Great Flood was the dramatic climax of this internal divine war. The king list records the cataclysm with chilling brevity. Then the flood swept over. No drama, no long description of waves, just the factual notation of a cosmic event that instantaneously ended a 241,200-year epoch of super longevity. This succinctness underscores the narrative style, objective, detached, and matter-of-fact, even when describing the end of the world. It's the tone of an observer who has seen such things before. The flood didn't just kill people, it physically changed the relationship between the rulers and the ruled. The sheer terror and trauma of the global deluge, regardless of its exact mythological or geological trigger, would have deeply impacted the surviving human population, making them far more compliant with the rules set by the gods who saved them or allowed them to be saved. When kingship was lowered a second time, it was lowered to Kish, and the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. The reign lengths were shorter, the divine beings were more distant, and the responsibility was placed more squarely on the shoulders of the mortals. Mortals who, critically, knew exactly what the consequences of failure looked like. The prophecy had been fulfilled in its first stage. The establishment was complete, the reset button was pressed, and the maintenance phase had begun. The story of the Anunnaki isn't just history, it's a warning, and understanding the context is everything. If the sheer scale of this narrative is captivating you, let me know in the comments. This is incredible. We need to keep this dialogue going to illuminate the dark corners of history. The post-Diluvian era, starting in Kish, represents the transition from the paternal rulers, the near immortals, to the proxy managers, the long-lived humans. Even the early post-flood kings, such as those in the first dynasty of Kish, like Etana, who supposedly flew to heaven on the back of an eagle, ruled for periods far beyond average human longevity, hundreds or even thousands of years. But the key is that these numbers were drastically reduced from the antediluvian era. This reduction is evidence of deliberate genetic or technological modification. If the Anunnaki utilized advanced genetic manipulation, as detailed in tablets describing the creation of man as a hybrid workforce, it stands to reason they could adjust the lifespan variable. The first kings might have been pure Anunnaki or first-generation hybrids with full longevity. The post-flood kings were perhaps second- or third-generation hybrids, engineered to be durable enough for long administrative terms, but mortal enough to prevent them from challenging the Anunnaki's eternal authority. They were administrators with built-in obsolescence. The reign of Etana is particularly relevant to the prophecy. His story, detailed in a separate cuneiform epic, describes him as the shepherd who ascended to heaven and consolidated all the foreign lands. His flight on the eagle to seek the plant of birth for a male heir shows a king actively seeking divine intervention and access to the sky world, the home of the Anunnaki. It symbolizes the human king's lingering desire for the immortality they knew had been taken away. Kish itself becomes a symbol of the renewed order. Unlike Eridu, Kish was immediately fortified, suggesting a more tumultuous world after the flood. The Anunnaki's rule was now perhaps less about benevolent guidance and more about maintaining strict control over a terrified, sprawling human population that was rapidly multiplying and beginning to exhibit complex, often warring behaviors. The king list proceeds to Uruk, which quickly becomes the dominant power center. Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, represents the pinnacle of the demigod era. Gilgamesh's quest, his struggle against the Bull of Heaven, his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, and his journey into the underworld are all cultural artifacts that serve to reinforce the prophecy. They normalize the idea of divine interaction and set the expectation that the celestial beings are always watching, judging, and intervening. The king list functions as a genealogy designed to keep track of the bloodline. The ANUNNAKi, being preoccupied with lineage and purity, often warring over who had the right to rule Earth, ensured that even the human proxies were connected to them genetically. The king list is, therefore, a record of the managed hybridization program, ensuring that the Earth's administrators remain sufficiently in the family. If the Anunnaki prophecy is about a cosmic clock, then the shift in rule from city to city, Kish to Uruk, Uruk to Ur, and so on, might not be about military conquest as much as about regional operational efficiency. As populations grew and geographical centers shifted, the headquarters of the Anunnaki network needed to adapt. The prophecy hinges on the concept of return. Why do the gods return? Because their resource needs, their strategic interests, or their celestial calendar demands it. The kingship structure they left behind was the ultimate fail-safe, a complex social system designed to maintain stability, prevent self-destruction, and keep the planet functioning as a productive resource colony. Consider the level of detail the Sumerians put into astrology and mathematics. They didn't invent the 360-degree circle and the sexagesimal base 60 system merely for fun. These were systems designed to track the precise astronomical movements necessary for predicting the Anunnaki's movements. The calendar was a prophecy predictor. When the alignments are right, the masters return. This intense focus on celestial events explains why the king list is often found adjacent to astronomical observations. The kings weren't just recording their own history, they were tracking their cosmic superiors. The entire project was tied to the movements of the stars, and particularly the movements of the supposed 12th planet, Nibiru, the alleged home of the Anunnaki. If Nibiru is the key, and its orbit is thousands of years long, then the king list's long reigns might literally correspond to the periods when Nibiru was closest, and the Anunnaki could easily travel to Earth. The shorter reigns, the post-flood era, represent the time when Nibiru is distant and communication and travel are infrequent, leaving the human proxies in charge. The modern skepticism surrounding this theory often stems from the lack of direct, undeniable physical evidence of a massive, technologically advanced Anunnaki presence, like spaceships or clear alien bodies. But the prophecy argues that the evidence is right in front of us, disguised as mythology and obscured by the historical trauma of the flood. The evidence isn't metallic debris. It's the fundamental structure of our civilization, the sudden appearance of writing, the obsession with gold, and the king list itself, which acts as the ultimate smoking gun. What would happen if we found undeniable physical proof of the Anunnaki technology buried under the sands of Eridu? It would invalidate every textbook on human evolution and history. This risk, this potential global paradigm shift, is why the Sumerian king list remains relegated to the fringe by those who prefer a comfortable, gradual timeline of human development. The maintenance phase, the era of shorter reigns, also saw the rise of human ambition and jealousy. As the Anunnaki influence waned, human leaders began to compete fiercely for regional dominance. This leads to the perpetual cycle of war and conquest that defines subsequent history. The Anunnaki prophecy suggests that this human chaos is merely tolerated as long as the necessary infrastructure, agriculture, mining, temples, remains operational. Are you feeling the deep connection between mythology and real history yet? If you want to keep exploring these secrets, hit that subscribe button right now. Your participation ensures that we continue to decode the Anunnaki agenda, which is central to understanding our world. The third major phase of the prophecy, following the establishment, long reigns, and the maintenance, short reigns, is the silent withdrawal. As the Sumerian civilization gave way to the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, the Anunnaki presence became increasingly subtle, morphing fully from physical beings into abstract, purely spiritual gods. This process was slow but relentless. Why the complete withdrawal? Perhaps their work was finished, or perhaps the human experiment had become too turbulent, too difficult to manage directly. The rise of Sargon of Akkad, who unified Mesopotamia and ushered in a new empire, symbolizes the moment human ambition truly eclipsed the direct influence of the divine kingship. Sargon, though claiming divine favor, was a military and political usurper, not a demigod of the lineage of Gilgamesh. The disappearance of the Anunnaki is often debated. Did they simply leave Earth en masse, returning to Nibiru as the celestial alignment shifted? Or did they retreat into deep Earth bases, watching human civilization evolve from below? Sumerian texts speak of the Abzu, the deep Earth, the realm of Enki, Lord of the Abyss. If the Anunnaki needed to stay on Earth to monitor their investments, but couldn't openly rule due to celestial constraints or geopolitical concerns, internal conflicts among themselves, retreating underground into highly advanced, self-sustaining cities makes perfect strategic sense. They would remain the silent architects, guiding events through dreams, omens, or specially chosen human proxies, prophets, and high priests. This silent observation phase is crucial to the prophecy because it emphasizes that the Anunnaki are not gone. They are merely in stealth mode. The structure of the king list, which trails off into historical periods where reign lengths are completely normal, doesn't mean the prophecy ended. It means the system of direct divine governance was suspended, pending activation. Think about the psychological effect on the later Sumerians and Babylonians. They worshipped gods they had never seen, whose physical presence was only a memory enshrined in ancient tablets. This sense of longing for the return of the glorious past, the age when gods walked the earth, permeates ancient Mesopotamian culture. It created a deep, ingrained belief in apocalypse and messianic return, a concept that would later be adopted by countless subsequent religions. The Anunnaki prophecy is essentially the earliest iteration of the Second Coming. They established the pattern, a golden age, antediluvian kings, a catastrophe, the flood, an age of transition, post-flood kings, and finally, a long period of silence, ending only with the dramatic return. This pattern suggests that the ultimate goal of the Anunnaki was not merely gold mining, but the cultivation of a specific kind of human civilization, one capable of sustaining itself technologically and administratively, but still fundamentally subservient and dependent on their creators for cosmic guidance and ultimate salvation. The king list, in its objective historical progression, serves as a countdown timer. The massive numbers at the start establish the parameters of the divine plan. The decreasing numbers indicate the increasing handover to human management. When the numbers stabilize, the current historical era, it means the system is ticking over, waiting for the celestial trigger that will initiate the final phase. What evidence supports the theory of the Anunnaki's retreat into the deep earth? The Sumerian descriptions of the Abzu are highly detailed, often involving complex machinery, bright lights, and beings capable of traversing massive distances quickly. These are not descriptions of mythical hellscapes. They sound like descriptions of advanced subterranean command centers powered by geothermal or nuclear energy, allowing the long-lived Anunnaki to wait out the millennia. Furthermore, many ancient cultures have parallel myths of underground cities or hidden masters who guide humanity from the shadows. Whether they are the Norse dwarves, the Native American ant people, or the Hindu Nagas, the concept of non-human powerful beings operating below the surface is universal. Could these be fragmented memories of the Anunnaki's strategic withdrawal? The sheer effort put into documenting the king list suggests that this wasn't just historical record-keeping. It was a testament, a covenant between the gods and the first human kings, guaranteeing the structure of their governance and hinting at the structure of their return. The king list serves as a constant reminder to the human rulers of their temporary status. You are holding the seat for someone. This sense of stewardship rather than ownership fundamentally shaped the early concept of rule. The king was a vessel, not the source of power. This template of delegated authority is perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Anunnaki, persisting in the concept of divine right, asserted by European monarchs thousands of years later. As we examine the later kings, we notice a stark contrast. Instead of rulers who manage planetary infrastructure, we see men obsessed with personal power, conquest, and territory. This human deviation from the original divine mandate might, in fact, be the final trigger for the prophecy's climax. If the Anunnaki return and find the planet fragmented, warring, and polluted, a state far removed from the ordered paradise of Eridu, they might view this human management phase as a catastrophic failure. The prophecy isn't just about their return, it's about the judgment that follows. The final stage of the prophecy, hinted at in various Sumerian and Akkadian omens, involves a celestial event, a specific planetary alignment that marks the end of human self-rule and the forceful re-establishment of the divine kingdom. This transition is expected to be violent, a second cataclysm designed not to reset the planet, but to purify and organize it under the direct, unyielding rule of the returning Anunnaki. We are now entering the phase of deep speculation, tying the ancient texts to modern anxieties. If this documentarian style is keeping you glued, hit that like button and activate the notification bell. We need to stay ahead of the curve as we track the cosmic timetable of the Anunnaki. The archaeological and linguistic challenges surrounding the king list cannot be overstated. When fragments of the list, such as the famous Weld-Blundell prism, were first translated in the early 20th century, researchers immediately recognized the chronological impossibility. The consensus was, and largely remains, that the pre-flood section is pure myth, while the post-flood section transitions gradually into verifiable history. However, the sheer meticulousness of the record challenges this easy dismissal. Why would sophisticated record keepers who detailed astronomical events and complex legal codes suddenly insert 241,200 years of literal nonsense into their foundational document? It doesn't fit the Sumerian pragmatic approach to governance. Their texts were usually records of debt, law, or royal decrees, not whimsical poetry. One of the most compelling pieces of circumstantial evidence, often cited by proponents of the Anunnaki theory, is the pervasive global mythology of the serpent race, or the sky people, who possessed immense longevity. These myths, spanning continents, consistently describe beings who came from the stars, created humanity, and then left, promising a return. In the case of the Anunnaki, they are often associated with reptilian or serpentine imagery. Enki, the god of the Abzu, is often associated with snakes and wisdom. If the longevity of the antediluvian kings was due to a non-human biology, perhaps a different genetic structure that utilized time differently, this would explain the perceived mythological element of their reigns. Let's return to the king list's statement. Kingship was lowered from heaven. This single phrase negates the possibility of natural, organic human development of governance. It implies imposition. For early Sumerians, their entire worldview was structured around this belief. Civilization is a gift, or perhaps a burden, imposed by outsiders. The Anunnaki prophecy dictates that this gift burden can be withdrawn or violently readjusted at any time based on the non-human cosmic schedule. Humanity is not the protagonist of this story. We are the setting. The multiple fragments and versions of the king list, including copies found at Kish, Ur, and Isin, generally agree on the sequence of events and the phenomenal reign lengths of the first kings. This consistency suggests a deeply rooted, shared institutional memory, not simply regional folklore. The continuity of the narrative across different political centers reinforces the idea that this list was a core governmental document, a definitive timeline maintained across Mesopotamia. If we look at the king list through a metaphorical lens, interpreting the thousands of years as units of relative power or importance rather than literal time, the problem still remains. Why did the unit of power, time, suddenly collapse after the flood? Even metaphorically, the king list implies a radical, deliberate shift in the nature of rule, linked inextricably to the global cataclysm. The most potent aspect of the Anunnaki prophecy is the profound implication regarding our own intelligence. The Sumerians, and by extension the Anunnaki, are credited with inventing complex systems like the highly accurate lunar calendar, advanced metallurgy, bronze working, and sophisticated legal frameworks, the Code of Ur-Nammu, preceding Hammurabi. Did the human race achieve all this organically in a rapid burst of genius, or was this knowledge, as the Sumerians insist, explicitly given to them? The texts describing Enki handing over the Mies, the building blocks of civilization, suggest a curriculum being delivered, not an organic discovery. The Anunnaki kings were the professors, ensuring the lessons were learned over thousands of years. The Mies included concepts of priesthood, kingship, military strategy, music, measuring, weaving, and even abstract concepts like truth, enmity, and deceit. The full list of the Mies reads like the operating manual for a functional society. If the Anunnaki provided the manual, then the prophecy is simply the schedule for checking their work. If the prophecy is true, then human history is merely the consequence of an ancient foreign policy decision. We are living inside a controlled environment, unaware of the vast, timeless agenda unfolding around us. The current world geopolitical situation, characterized by constant tension, ecological collapse, and unprecedented technological acceleration, can be viewed through the lens of the prophecy as the final, desperate struggle of human self-rule. We are fouling the nest, and if the Anunnaki view Earth as their resource base, the current state of affairs might be the perfect catalyst for their return, not as saviors, but as highly annoyed landlords coming to evict the incompetent tenants. This perspective elevates the Sumerian king list from dusty artifact to crucial roadmap, a map that dictates the future as much as it records the past. The reigns of Alulim and Alalngar were the beginning. Our current instability may be the end of the human management phase. We're nearing the conclusion where we synthesize these ancient beliefs into a modern prediction. If this content opened your mind, strengthen this work by commenting your thoughts right now and sharing the video. Every share helps uncover these profound secrets. The enduring influence of the Anunnaki extends far beyond Sumer. When the city of Babylon rose to power, the new rulers, particularly Hammurabi, meticulously linked their lineage and legal structures back to the traditions established in Eridu and Uruk. They did not dismiss the ancient kings, they internalized them. Marduk, the Babylonian chief god, was often depicted utilizing the iconography and mandates originally ascribed to Enlil and Enki. This continuous thread of respect for the original divine mandate across millennia, spanning multiple empires and linguistic shifts, suggests that the historical memory of the long-lived rulers was not easily discarded. It was too fundamental to the concept of authority. If you could claim the legitimacy of the kings who ruled for 36,000 years, your power was absolute. The prophecy, therefore, maintains its validity by becoming woven into the fabric of subsequent geopolitical power structures. Every coronation, every declaration of divine right, is an echo of the moment kingship was lowered from heaven to Eridu. The subtle differences in the various king list copies also hint at political maneuvering throughout history. Later, scribes sometimes adjusted reign lengths or king sequences to favor their own patron cities or dynasties. However, the pre-flood section remains remarkably resistant to these changes. The colossal numbers are always there. It's as if those first reigns were too sacred, too universally accepted as historical fact, to be edited or challenged by later human rulers trying to rewrite history. They may have fudged a few centuries in the post-flood era, but they dared not touch the 28,800 years of Alulim. This suggests that the Anunnaki's influence in the deep past was so overwhelming and well documented that even subsequent civilizations felt obligated to respect the original divine ledger. Let's contemplate the implications of the prophecy for the modern era. If the Anunnaki operate on a time scale dictated by a solar system that functions differently than ours, the 3,600-year cycle of Nibiru, then their absence is merely a long deployment. They may not view the last 4,000 years of human history, from the Bronze Age collapse to the present day, as a significant period of time at all, perhaps equivalent to a lunch break for us. This indifference to human time scales makes the prophecy uniquely terrifying. When they return, they won't be impressed by our technological progress or our democratic ideals. They will be checking on the status of their infrastructure and the productivity of their labor force. The prophecy often concludes with the expectation of a golden age being restored upon the Anunnaki's return. But a golden age for whom? For the Anunnaki, the Golden Age was a period of perfect, unchallenged planetary stewardship, facilitated by their immortal proxies. For humanity, this might mean the end of self-determination and a return to the highly structured, potentially restrictive environment of forced labor. The King List, in its cold numerical documentation, holds the key not just to the past, but to the future. It establishes the precedent for divine intervention and planetary control. The prophecy ensures that the expectation of this intervention remains alive, simmering just beneath the surface of global consciousness, often manifesting in esoteric beliefs, UFO sightings, and deep-seated fears of external, non-human management. The final, chilling question posed by the King List is this: did the Anunnaki ever truly leave? Or did they simply perfect the art of invisible governance, allowing humanity to believe it was in control while ensuring the global system continues to operate in alignment with their original, millennia-old mandate? The reduction of the king's lifespan might have been the ultimate test. Can humanity self-manage to the extent required by the distant masters? If the answer is no, then the countdown, documented in the King List, is nearly complete. The final revelation is not a surprise event, but the predictable end of an observed, documented cycle. The methodology of expansion demanded by this deep dive forces us to consider the micro-details of Sumerian life under these long-lived kings. How did commerce function? If King Alulim ruled for almost 29,000 years, imagine the complexity of establishing trade routes, currency standards, and agricultural techniques that needed to survive multiple climate shifts within a single reign. The King List is not just a chronological record, it is a testament to the stability provided by absolute, long-term rule. No changing policies, no democratic shifts, no generational forgetting of techniques. Knowledge was continuous and enforced. This extreme stability is what allowed Sumer to achieve such rapid, profound civilizational leaps. The irrigation systems, for example, were massive undertakings, requiring precise engineering and coordinated maintenance across vast regions of Mesopotamia. Such long-term planning demands an overseer with a long-term view, a view only available to the antediluvian kings. A normal human king might start an irrigation canal. Alulim would finish it 10,000 years later. This detail reinforces the core premise of the Anunnaki prophecy. The early civilization was a managed project designed for durability and efficiency, regardless of the cost to human individual liberty. The psychological dimension of the prophecy is perhaps the most lasting. Even today, we see the remnants of the Sumerian anxiety about external control. The fear of deep-state conspiracies, secretive cabals, and extraterrestrial intervention is simply the modern manifestation of the ancient, documented knowledge that humanity was created and managed by a higher, non-human power structure. The king list is the official record of that management hierarchy. The final block of the king list, which leads up to the historically verifiable reigns of dynasties like the Third Dynasty of Ur, gradually normalizes the situation. The demigods fade, and the fully mortal kings take over, battling for resources and territory in the manner we now consider history. This normalization period is the deep sleep of the prophecy, the time when humanity is left to its own devices, largely unaware that the original rulers are merely waiting for their solar window to reopen. The legacy of the Anunnaki king list is that it provides a radically different timeline for human history, a timeline measured in cosmic orbits and genetic engineering projects rather than simple human wars and treaties. If this document is taken literally, humanity is fundamentally younger than we believe, and our civilization is far more recent, built upon the ruins and templates left behind by a truly ancient alien civilization. The Anunnaki prophecy warns that the system is closed loop. We cannot escape the cycle. We were created for a purpose, and when that purpose is either fulfilled or threatened by our own chaos, the masters will return to impose order. The king list stands as the ancient contract, detailing the terms of that relationship: long reigns, obedience, and maintenance of the planet's core functions. We have been failing the maintenance phase for centuries. The dramatic conclusion of the prophecy is what grips those who study it. The Anunnaki will return, not necessarily to save us, but to reclaim their creation and their property. The timeline, though vague now, is embedded in the heavens, watched by the stars that the Sumerians themselves mapped with terrifying precision. The Sumerian tablets detail not only the king's reigns, but also the construction of the major temples dedicated to the Anunnaki. These temples, or ziggurats, were enormous structures, built often over many successive generations, demanding immense resources and labor. This continuous construction effort, spanning the impossibly long reigns of the first kings, underscores the Anunnaki's need for stable, long-term project management. Imagine Alulim overseeing the construction of the first temple in Eridu. He would see it begun, witness its completion, and likely watch it fall into ruin and be meticulously rebuilt several times, all within his single tenure. For a human king, building a pyramid was a life's work. For an Anunnaki proxy, it was merely one item on a millennium-spanning to-do list. The prophecy links the prosperity of the human world directly to the maintenance of these religious and logistical centers. When the temples are maintained, the gods are pleased and prosperity reigns. When they are neglected, the gods withdraw their favor or actively intervene to destroy the civilization, as happened with the flood. This established the primary moral contract of the Sumerian worldview: servitude equals safety. The prophecy is thus a conditional promise. Obey the mandate established by the king list, and the masters will allow the human proxies to continue their temporary rule. Deviate and face the consequences of the second coming. The transition to the short reigns, therefore, was not merely a biological shift, but a political message. The Anunnaki were testing humanity's ability to maintain the infrastructure without constant hands-on supervision. The reigns became shorter as a way to force human leaders to create sustainable, replicable systems that didn't rely on the institutional memory of a single, near-immortal being. They created bureaucracy. The invention of bureaucracy, of complex systems of records and administration, can thus be seen as an Anunnaki project designed to function in their absence. The King List is the ultimate organizational chart for their planetary enterprise. The enduring mystery of the King List is the gap between the last antediluvian king, Ziusudra of Shuruppak, and the first post-flood king, Gushur of Kish. Ziusudra, warned by Enki, survives the deluge and is granted immortality. He is the link, the final recipient of the super-longevity lineage, but he does not continue the line of kingship. Instead, the list starts fresh in Kish with new, shorter reigns, stating that kingship was lowered from heaven a second time. Why was Ziusudra removed from the political timeline? Because his immortality meant he was now fully integrated into the Anunnaki structure, no longer suitable for managing the mortal human workers. He became part of the heavenly council, perhaps the ultimate reward for loyalty. The Anunnaki prophecy therefore suggests a vetting process: obey the long-lived rulers, survive the cataclysm, and ascend to join the Anunnaki. But for the rest of humanity, the mandate remains: serve the new mortal proxy rulers and wait for the final cosmic shift. We must now consider the specific geopolitical structure implied by the King List. The movement of the seat of power, from Eridu to Bad Tibira, then Larag, Sipar and Shuruppak, before the flood, suggests an established route or progression. These shifts might trace the movement of the Anunnaki leaders themselves, or the migration of critical resource zones. For instance, Shuruppak, the final pre-flood city, was associated with the Anunnaki god Sud, Ninlil, who was intimately tied to farming and grain production. If the antediluvian era was nearing its end due to climate shift or resource depletion, which may have contributed to the Anunnaki internal conflict, Shurupak's focus on essential sustenance would make it a logical final administrative center before the Great Reset. The fact that the King List details specific cities and not just names adds a layer of verifiable history to the mythology. These cities existed. Their ruins confirm human habitation during the relevant periods, and their cultural significance aligns with the deities assigned to them. The conflict arises only when we confront the timescale. If we reject the massive timescale, we reject the Anunnaki narrative. If we accept the massive timescale, we must accept the non-human intervention. The prophecy demands we choose between comfortable historical continuity and radical, unsettling truth. The Anunnaki prophecy is not just historical extrapolation, it's a commentary on power and longevity. In our modern, accelerated world, political and corporate power is short-sighted, focused on quarterly reports and four-year election cycles. This is the ultimate inverse of the antediluvian kingship, where foresight extended across millennia. The Sumerians, guided by the long-lived rulers, were masters of sustainable, long-term resource management. The prophecy might suggest that humanity's current short-sighted chaos is precisely why the Anunnaki will need to return and seize control. We have failed the test of sustainable long-term self-management imposed by the shortened lifespans. We took the gift of bureaucracy and turned it into chaos. The very act of transcribing the King List must have been an act of profound religious and historical significance for the scribes. They were committing to permanence a timeline that defied human experience. They were encoding the prophecy into the foundation of their education system. Every child learning cuneiform in Sumer knew the names Alulim and Alalngar. They knew the number 28,800. This knowledge wasn't esoteric, it was mandatory. It was the civic foundation that taught them their place in the cosmic hierarchy, subservient to the eternal masters. The current challenge for historians and researchers is to move beyond the simple categorization of myth and to explore what historical truth the mythology is attempting to protect. The king list is highly inconvenient data, and in the pursuit of truth, inconvenience often marks the path to the biggest secrets. The enduring legacy of the king list is the subtle but profound effect it has had on subsequent global culture. The concept of the demigod, the hero who struggles against his own mortality, Gilgamesh, and the belief in a cyclical pattern of history, the rise and fall of ages, all find their explicit documentation in this single tablet. If the Anunnaki prophecy is about control, then the king list is the instruction manual for continuous intergenerational governance. It ensures that even after the kingship transitions from divine proxy to fully human ruler, the fundamental structure, the reverence for the divine origin of law and power, remains intact. The Greek gods, the Olympians, often resemble the Sumerian Anunnaki in their petty squabbles, their genetic manipulation of mortals, and their use of powerful technology, Zeus's lightning bolts, the flying chariots. It is plausible that the Anunnaki prophecy and the history documented in the king list traveled westward and was diluted and repurposed into the foundation of Western mythology. But unlike the Greek myths, which generally assign abstract attributes to their gods, the Sumerian texts, as embodied by the king list, are relentlessly practical and specific about the Anunnaki's presence, their requirements, and their schedule. The prophecy's critical element is the long wait. We are living in the long wait. The chaos and turbulence of the human era might be seen as the ultimate test of the infrastructure they left behind. Can the human race avoid complete self-destruction for the necessary duration of the Anunnaki's orbital absence? If the answer is no, and we reach a point of global nuclear or ecological collapse, the prophecy suggests the Anunnaki will intervene, not out of altruism, but to save their planetary asset from complete ruin. This intervention would mark the end of the human management phase and the re-establishment of the divine, long-reign kingship, a literal return to the structure documented at the beginning of the king list. The implications of this cycle are staggering. It means history does not progress in a straight line toward enlightenment or freedom. It cycles between periods of strict external management and periods of temporary, chaotic human autonomy. The Anunnaki prophecy is the definition of cosmic pessimism. No matter what humanity achieves, our existence is fundamentally subordinate to the timescale and agenda of our creators. The Sumerian Kings List is not just a historical artifact. It is the ultimate non-negotiable contract binding humanity to the Anunnaki. The modern interpretation of the Anunnaki prophecy often involves theories of corporate global control systems that subtly manage humanity in the absence of the gods. If the Anunnaki established an infrastructure based on gold mining, resource management, and social control through religion, it is logical to assume they would leave behind human or hybrid operatives to maintain the system across the millennia. These modern proxies would be the true hidden rulers of Earth, the deep state or the Illuminati archetypes that pervade current conspiracy theories. The king list gives ancient credence to this idea. Rulers who are not quite human, operating with an external, non-human agenda. The longevity of the antediluvian kings was necessary to establish the foundation of this system. Their continuous presence guaranteed that the core principles of control were deeply integrated into the human subconscious. The transition to the shorter reigns simply masked the control structure, moving it from overt divine command to covert institutional manipulation. This shift defines the fundamental challenge of the prophecy, recognizing that the systems we rely on Our banking structures, our legal codes, our religious dogmas might not be organic human inventions, but engineered artifacts designed to keep us compliant and productive until the master's return. The king list's numbers are the key. They represent a different measurement of reality, a reality where time is subordinate to cosmic objectives. By focusing on the vastness of the early reigns, the list compels us to look beyond the human-centric narrative and accept the possibility of a grander, more alien plan. To fully grasp the magnitude of the Anunnaki prophecy, we must visualize the moment of the second lowering of kingship in Kish. Imagine the world right after the catastrophic flood, muddy, terrified, shattered. And then, from the sky comes the command structure, re-establishing order. This event, enshrined in the king list, serves as the ultimate reminder of the Anunnaki's power. They can destroy and recreate civilization at will. The establishment of the shorter reigns was a merciful but pragmatic concession. They needed administrators, not immortal overseers, for the maintenance period. The final definitive text supporting the prophecy's conclusion is often cited as the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, which details the complex hierarchy of the Anunnaki, their wars, and their explicit role in creating mankind. Lulu Amalu, the primitive worker. If they created us, they own us. The king list is merely the asset register. The Anunnaki prophecy, as documented by the Sumerian king list, is a narrative of stewardship, ownership, and eventual reclamation. It is the story of humanity's origins, told not from our perspective, but from the detached, logistical viewpoint of the eternal rulers who established the long reigns and wait for the cosmic clock to call them home. The very format of the Sumerian king list, its linear, factual, and chronological presentation, makes it resistant to easy mythological categorization. It presents itself as undeniable historical truth. If we accept the possibility that the Sumerians were in fact telling the truth, that their first kings ruled for impossibly long periods because they were not subject to human mortality, then the prophecy is inescapable. We are nearing the end of the human chapter, the temporary autonomy granted by the distant gods. The Anunnaki prophecy is the timeline for the eventual cosmic eviction notice. The precise numbers of the initial reigns stand as silent monuments to the immense timescale of the rulers who first established civilization on Earth. The king list ends, but the story does not. It pauses, waiting for the celestial alignments to bring the ancient rulers back into our orbit. The prophecy states that when the time is right, kingship will once again be redefined, and the reigns will likely revert to the extreme longevity required for cosmic, long-term management. Our history will end where it began, under the direct, long-reign rule of the beings who lowered kingship from heaven. The final conclusion, the ultimate implication of the Sumerian king list and the Anunnaki prophecy, is unsettling. We are not the masters of our own destiny. We are the subjects of a cosmic management plan that predates our oldest memories. The massive numbers, 28,800 years, 36,000 years, are not mistakes. They are the indelible stamp of the eternal upon the temporal. The evidence is preserved in the baked clay tablets of Mesopotamia, patiently awaiting a generation of researchers willing to look past their skepticism and accept the sheer, terrifying possibility that the most ancient history of mankind is also the blueprint for its future. The kings may be gone, but the prophecy dictates they are merely preparing for the return. What would you do if you knew for certain that your civilization was merely a holding pattern, waiting for the original owners to return and claim their property? The Sumerians knew, and they wrote it down meticulously for us to eventually decode. If this content opened your mind to the extreme possibilities of the Sumerian kings list, comment below. I reached the end. This helps us understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface level. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now, and activate the bell, because the next episodes will dive even deeper into the artifacts they left behind. And don't leave without clicking on the next recommended video. It's the continuation of this monumental journey. Check 2, check 3, check 4, check 5, check 6, check 7, check 8, check.